Let's start off with something you're probably familiar with. In this scene, nudity represents vulnerability. Hitchcock putting the audience in a very relatable, familiar position. Your eyes closed as soap and water run down your face and block your vision. And then your privacy, your safety is violated. Fear more commonly can be defined as an aversion towards the unknown. This is why horror as a genre is dominated primarily by the supernatural. Stories centered around the foreign, the unknowable, life after death, good and evil, concepts we can never quite define fully, folk stories filled with ghosts and lessons on morality. And these work. That's why they've lasted so long, but I would argue that reality will always be far stranger than fiction, far stranger than anything we can imagine, and therefore will always be more terrifying. This is the basis of psychological horror, the inherent trauma of the human experience. Horror as a genre is built to represent the possible extremes of your life. Drama can be used to acknowledge poverty, grief, and war, but only horror films are allowed to cross that invisible line and take the audience into places we really shouldn't want to go. And I think this is what makes psychological horror so fascinating. It does the opposite, turning around and walking the other direction, replacing the unknown with the familiar, choosing to put you in positions you've already or quite possibly could be in. So Psycho is a film that has been psychoanalyzed to death. Let's instead talk about films that have been inspired or at the very least influenced by Psycho and Hitchcock's larger body of work. A film like Shiver Baby. Psychological horror is primarily a conversation on perception. It emphasizes mental health and point of view, using emotion as a filter to which the story's world is presented to the audience. So the film attempts to do more than just scare you. In Shiver Baby, we see Danielle on a day of mourning maneuver conversations between her staunchly religious family, her estranged ex-girlfriend, her sugar daddy, and his wife. And in all of this, the film makes us privy to everything Danielle feels. Every single strand of anxiety pulled by every expectation she fails to amount to, frustration from passive aggressive conversations, the suffocation of a loving family, the guilt, shame not only in her choices but in herself, in the fact that she hasn't done more at her age, and in the fact that she has no idea how to be more. And yet, she's expected to, or at least she feels as though she is, as she compares herself to everyone around her. Shiver Baby captures that very familiar sense of existential dread and lets the audience sit in it and feel it for an hour straight. And then there's films like The Babadook and Hereditary, which are stories primarily focused on the supernatural but that take a very unorthodox approach to it. I want to focus on two scenes in specific and the themes surrounding them: family and your inherent responsibility for their well being. In Hereditary, we see Peter forced into taking his little sister to a party. There's tension, even resentment, as she unintentionally puts him in an uncomfortable position. But the tone rapidly shifts as she has an allergic reaction and starts to suffocate, her throat swelling, as Peter speeds down an empty road, panicking, fearing for her life. And then there's the Babadook, centered around a single mother trying to raise an unruly child on her own. We acknowledge feelings of hate, regret, depression, anxiety slowly manifest into a literal monster. But specifically, I'm fascinated by one of its opening scenes. Amelia distracted by a conversation as her son plays in the background. Her focus shifted away as her son climbs higher and higher on the swing set. The scene resonates because it's so very plausible, acknowledging the fragility of the people you love, the relationships you have with them, your own state of mind, how much you feel, and how easily it can all change. Lastly, I want to talk about two other films, The Blair Witch Project and Jeanne Dielman. The horrifying elements of these films are not only in the content of their narratives, but in the nature in which the narrative is presented to the audience. The Blair Witch Project was one of the first in what is now known as the found footage genre, where a fictional story is presented to the audience in documentary format. Interviews, raw camera work, mostly low-budget sets, creating the illusion of reality. The characters speaking directly to you, the audience, blurring their world into yours, attempting to convince you that this could happen, this did happen. In the same vein, the 1976 film Jeanne Dielman does something similar, but takes a more subtle approach to it. It wasn't shot as a horror film, but I would argue that it achieves so much of what the horror genre as a whole aspires for, a natural sense of dread. Jeanne Dielman is a film about Jeanne, compiling her life as a widowed housewife, framing her in these static, muted, repetitive shots, cooking, cleaning, eating, cooking, cleaning, eating. The dread lies in the fact that this is all of it. The audience expecting the next shot and the next day of her life to be different, better, more interesting, but it never is. This is it. Her responsibility to her son, chaining her to this house, to her supposed duties as a woman, to jobs she is barely interested in doing. This is her entire life, and without a soundtrack, this film creates a very real and very hollow sense of fear. Because the film forces you to feel what she feels, this boredom and loss of interest in your own existence. In the end, it's Jeanne who breaks the cycle, saying enough is enough. Psychological horror at its best is a vicarious experience, attempting to facilitate the psyche of its audience. It makes you and your experiences a part of the conversation, much like a romance, inviting you to become a part of the story as a whole, for better or for worse.